Hello everyone, it's Ryan with Frontline Animal Removal. Today we're going to talk about some beaver trapping. And I'm going to tell you about the different kind of traps to use for catching beaver, and their advantages, disadvantages, or effectiveness, and why you should never beaver trap unless you learn from a pro by doing some apprenticeship. So let's move on to the traps. Okay, here's our first trap. This is a live catch beaver trap. It's a double door design. We got one massive door here, and we got one massive door down there. This trap would be set in this position, submerged in the water. Usually the top of the water is right along about here, and this would get placed in a beaver's run. And what a beaver's run is, in the swamps and creeks and ponds that they swim in, they cut channels in the bottom of the waterway so that they can stay submerged in the water even if the water is only a couple inches deep. The advantage to this trap is it is sized just right for a beaver's run, and it will work in very shallow water situations. The disadvantage is it's a big trap. So, you can see my hand here. That's wide, it's tall. This trap is heavy. The other disadvantage of this trap is when you do catch a beaver, you may end up with a 50-60 pound animal in this cage, and your truck might be a couple hundred yards away, and you gotta drag the animal in the cage to your truck. That's a big pain in the butt. Do we use this trap? Yes, we do. We have used it successfully, but it's not our first go-to trap for beaver. Is it effective? Yes, it is, but it's kind of a pain due to its large size. So let's take a look at another trap that we have used successfully on beaver, and that is a snare. Well, a snare isn't really a trap. A snare is just a cable that cinches down on an animal. And this is one of our snares. This snare isn't really sized correctly for a beaver, but I'm using it for demonstration purposes. We have a swivel here. This section right here would get attached to a swivel here and then anchored. And this is usually anchored deep into the ground. The reason why you use swivels right here is so that the wire can twist, because when the animal gets caught, it doesn't kill the animal runs around trying to get off. It's like being on a leash, and they're going to pull and tug. If you don't allow the cable to swivel, what will happen is this cable will start twisting and breaking. But the way the snare works is we have a slide and we have a breakaway. The breakaway is designed so that any large animals that get into it, it can snap off and they can escape, because we're only going after targeted animals. And the way the snare works is this gets mounted onto usually a little wire frame, and it gets hung on the beaver's trail on land. And he's walking along and he tries to go down the trail, and he just thinks this is brush or a piece of twig. He doesn't really notice that this is metal. It doesn't occur to them. So they're walking along and they hit this, and the loop collapses. And as the loop collapses, this slide allows the wire to slide this way, but not back. And then it cinches down around him. And now he's leashed, and he can't get out. So if you pull this down, and you try to pull it this way, it doesn't pull back open. These cables are size specific, and we're very picky about what brand we get so that we have nice smooth action. We just want it to collapse. What are some of the disadvantages and advantages of a snare? Well, a snare is incredibly compact. We can coil it up. It takes up no space at all. They're very inexpensive. $1 or $2 and you got your snare. Disadvantages of a snare, well, it has to be set on land. That is a disadvantage with beaver trapping. The other disadvantage of a snare, it's a one-time use tool. So once the beaver's caught, he's going to damage the snare and it can never be reused. Now the little swivels, the slides, they can be reused. The S-hook can be reused, but the rest of it is thrown away and we have to make a new one. So these all, we manufacture most of our snares. How often do we use them? Well, with beaver trapping, it's rare that we use them, but there are special cases where we have a really good trail in a place that's out of the way and we can set up a snare. But most of the time we don't use these. Next trap on our list is a good old-fashioned foothold trap. We have used these to catch beaver, but we don't use them very often. Part of the problem with the foothold trap is you have to set it up in such a way that the beaver is going to stick his foot in there. So you have to find a trail. And with beaver, you typically would set this on the edge of the waterway where they're stepping into or out of the water. Foothold traps are designed to grab onto the animal's paw, not damage the paw, and just hold on to it like holding on to a hand. They have swivels on them. This one's got a minimum of 3. Let's see, we got a swivel here, we got a swivel here, and we got a swivel up here. You might wonder why the swivels are important. Well, once this grabs onto the animal's paw, the animal's going to try to get out of it. He's going to twist around, jump around, bounce around. And if this can't spin around like this, the animal is going to damage his paw. And we don't want the animal to damage his paw, because the animal that damages paw is an animal that gets away. We want that paw happy and healthy with good blood flow and no damage. Because if you damage the paw goes numb, and then they can yank it out of the trap or they can twist it out of the trap. But a paw that's in good condition with good blood flow, that is uninjured, will not get away. So that's why we have multiple swivels, and we like the center swivel in the middle. That gives us your best movement to prevent the animal from getting out. This trap is probably not sized correctly for the beaver, and I have personally not used a foothold trap, but my business partner Brian has, and he has caught beaver with them successfully. And the way that it works is this gets bedded down in the soil along the water's edge. The animal steps into it and it grabs his paw. You can see that this trap is squeezing this tube, and it's squeezing a little bit, but this is a hollow tube. I can squeeze this tube more than the trap has. So its clamping force isn't huge. With beaver, because they are large animals, these traps are best used along the water's edge where they go in and out, and where the water is deep nearby, because the end of this gets set up on a sliding cable. The sliding cable is anchored somewhere near shore, and then there is another anchor point deep into the water. And the idea is this will slide down the cable one way into the deep water, and it drowns the beaver quickly, effectively, and that prevents the beaver from getting away and prevents him from being noticed. And drowning sets are common practice in trapping for animals in the water areas, because it's a quick way of dispatching them. Do we use these often? No, not very often. But it's one of the tools that we can use. Now here is our go-to tool for beaver trapping. This is a 330 Conibear body gripping trap. Now, if you heard the term Conibear, that's just a brand, but technically this is a body gripping trap. This trap is composed of these 2 square wires, and when set, it forms a square with a trigger wire. These have to be placed submerged in the water. You cannot use these on land. That is illegal. One end of this gets anchored onto something, The way that it works is this is placed at a point where the beaver is swimming through the water, and he hits the trigger wire and the trap clamps down onto him. This trap has a huge amount of clamping force. It can break bones. The idea is it kills the beaver quickly and effectively. And because it's submerged below water, it keeps things out of sight and unnoticeable. The reason why it can only be used submerged into water is to prevent non-target animals from finding it. Occasionally a muskrat finds it, but this is very effective at specifically targeting beaver. This trap here is a little example of that one. I am not going to set that trap because it is dangerous, and I don't feel like playing around with it on camera and getting my hands smacked and getting hurt. So I got this little guy, which is a little 110, which is a smaller version, and it uses a single spring. I have been whacked with these before, but this is how the trap is set. When this spring expands, it throws this side down and this side down, clamping onto the animal. So this trap would be effective for muskrat or mink. We've also used them for squirrels on occasion. But essentially the animal comes up, he tries to pass through the trap clamps down and euthanizes the animal quickly. This is our most common trap to use for beaver. Now at the beginning I said why you shouldn't be doing beaver trapping unless you have an experienced beaver trapper with you, because that trap is dangerous. You're in the water trying to set this submerged in the water where you can't see it. You do have safeties on your springs which prevent the springs from expanding, but it's very difficult to clamp these things down with your bare hands. We actually have a tool to clamp them down to make it easier, and even then it can be difficult. So you're in the water setting this trap. You have to take these safeties off once it's set, and at that point the trap becomes live, and then there's a possibility that when you're fooling around with your waterproof gloves you bump something and set it off, and then you can be in big trouble. The reason why you wouldn't want to use this by yourself, it's a big heavy trap. Dragging this across a field or through the woods or a swamp all by yourself is going to be tiring and challenging, and you could get hurt. This isn't so much a bad deal, but if you use this in a non-drowning set, then you have to deal with a beaver that is alive, and then you have to dispatch him. Or if you do not want to dispatch him, then you have to try to slide a catch pole over him and maneuver him into a cage such as this or such as that. That is a real pain in the butt, and a 50-some pound beaver bouncing around can cause you some damage, so don't do it. And likewise with the snare, if you snare a beaver, he's going to be bouncing around and upset with you when he shows up, and you have to get close to dispatch the animal, and you want to do it quickly and humanely. So it's best to leave all this beaver trapping nonsense to us who have done it before. I only know a little bit about beaver trapping because I've only done a little bit about it. My counterpart Brian has done lots of it. He's very good, but he's camera shy. That's why I'm making this video. I may have not gotten everything 100% correct, but that's because Brian won't come on camera and explain it all. So I'm doing it. I think I got most of it correct. But if you're having beaver problems, give us a call. We'll check it out. We'll figure out which of these traps to use. We'll set them up and get your beaver caught. Thank you.